All right, guys. I did not want to cover this because I don't like lefty infighting. I don't like dealing with that. It feels very unproductive for a variety of reasons. However, this particular bit of pedantry I am going to be covering. Now, I do want to give people the fair warning. This is from a content creator known as Matt Dillahunty. Y'all might have checked out his stuff before on the Atheist Experience or on The Line with Jimmy Snow. I have a lot of respect for Jimmy. I've worked with Jimmy before, and I would like to work with him again in the future. And I have a ton of respect for Matt Dillahunty. I've watched basically everything from before the last 2 years. Mostly every debate that he did in person for the longest time. I watched a lot. I've seen a lot of the dude's content. I've also hung out with him and broke bread with him, so maybe that will help elucidate some of my biases going in. But this particular thing is something that I think we need to avoid. There is a problem within the atheist sphere of the internet where we get pedantic to the point of uselessness, basically. And I'm going to go ahead and show up the thread here. If you've been following Actual Jake's content, you've probably seen where this has gone already. Jimmy Snow did a video, which I'm not going to be covering right now, about the Trump assassination attempt. And there was, from what I understand, there's a part in the video that talks about basically not celebrating that an assassin tried to kill Trump. I have already done my video on this particular topic. I'm not going to rehash anything that I said in there. But let's go ahead and look at what happened in this particular exchange. Now, Sarah here is, of course, Jake's partner. Said, I feel disappointment when a bunch of white men are telling me I need to feel bad for Hitler 2.0 getting hurt after he said he wants to put me and my loved ones in concentration camps. This was the major point of contention right here. So, Matt Dillahunty says, nobody here says you need to feel bad for him. I don't. I'm also not swayed by hyperbole. So far, we're not in a terrible realm. Sarah says it's not hyperbole to talk about what Trump himself has said or what he plans, what the plans of Project 2025 is. They want queer people dead. I don't think we need to play respectability politics with a fascist. And then Dillahunty says, show me where they have said that they want queer people dead or in concentration camps. Now, we've covered Michael Knowles' words about eliminating transgenderism on my stream already. We already know where this goes. Also, we're already making a bit of an assumption here. The assumption that people in politics do not speak in euphemisms. If there's anything that political correspondents have taught us, pundits have taught us, is that oftentimes it is literally the job of political correspondents to figure out what certain euphemisms mean. For instance, if Trump goes on record and says that he wants to bring jobs back to America by making sure that our borders are closed, that's not him saying that he wants to keep Americans more employed. That's him saying, and we know from experience that's him saying, that he wants to deport all of the illegal immigrants out of the United States. Oftentimes, very much when they are trying to get citizenship, or in the middle of trying to get citizenship, as has happened before. Euphemism is the toy of politicians. It allows them to gain power incrementally and convince people that they are or are not going to do certain things, because people will start inserting their own ideas into what the politician is saying or is doing. Luckily, when it comes to Project 2025, we have a very detailed idea of what they want to do. Now, looking at the actual response that Sarah gives here, she says, rollbacks on trans rights, including access to healthcare, wanting queer people to be registered as sex offenders, mass deportation of immigrants, giving unchecked power to the president. It's crazy not to see where this is going. Looking here, in Restoring the Family, the authors write the next president to remove the terms of sexual orientation and gender identity, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We actually already covered that part of Project 2025. getting rid of gender equality, gender equity, gender awareness. Again, that's all shit we've already covered. The report likens pornography to transgender ideology. Again, we already covered that. And if somebody likens being transgender to pornography and then wants to ban pornography, you can't say that's not trying to ban being transgender. It's a very obtuse thing to try to argue, because every single piece of the rhetorical puzzle has been put in front of you. Every single piece of the rhetorical puzzle has been set in there for you to analyze. You can put 2 and 2 together. They don't need to literally say, we want to eliminate the transgenders, for you to understand that that's what they're trying to do. So, goes on pointing out that among the policies of Project 2025, there's limiting LGBTQ rights, eradicating federal funding and DEI programs, purging the governmental, apolitical civil servants. Again, this is all stuff that we've covered in my coverage of Project 2025 so far. This is literally first 100 pages stuff. Unfortunately, there is a mistake here. Matt Dillahunty, for all of the respect that I have for him, decides to be incredibly pedantic here. Because after all of this, after giving a lot of evidence here, and again, we've read the document, we know what it says, or at least we've read enough of the document to know what it says. There's still more in that document. Matt then says, it's hyperbole, period. You could not produce what you said and keep pushing it. You're right that it's all problematic, and you may be right about some folks' secret desire. But they're not expressing the desire you claim. That's hyperbole. Again, I feel like it's perfectly reasonable when politicians that I've covered in previous videos have said that certain people need killing, and these same politicians are on board with Project 2025, and these same politicians say we should kill pedophiles openly, and these same politicians try to do these funny things like likening trans people to pedophiles, or likening gay people to pedophiles. I feel like every single piece you need for the rhetorical puzzle has already been laid in front of you. They don't need to glue it together. They've already done so. Now, how would you eliminate transgenderism? Here's the first thing I would ask. The one pundit I'll specifically name for this is Michael Knowles, who's the one who actually said we should eliminate transgenderism. And Trump saying that he would eliminate all, basically saying we'd eliminate transgenderism when he said everything that he did on the post that Stacey K showed, which showed that he wanted to get rid of HRT for trans people. He wanted to make sure that we eradicated anything involving gender ideology in the United States. How do you eradicate people like that? If I said we needed to eradicate Christianity, while a good faith interpretation of that might be that I just want to prevent people from believing in Christianity, and that would be one interpretation of it. But a more alarming version of that, and in some cases a more accurate version of that statement, would be to go one step further and ask the question, how would you do that? Let's say, for instance, that we agree that belief is not something that can be changed actively by an individual. We all have the ability to take into account the information available to us, but the ability to actively change our beliefs is kind of an impossible thing to change. Now, people do naturally change their beliefs, and sometimes when presented with evidence, they can change their mind on things, but in terms of whether or not you believe something, you cannot make an active effort to not believe something. You can make an active effort to convince yourself of something, but you cannot stop the belief. If you want an example of this, stop believing Australia exists for just a moment, and you'll find that it is an impossible task. Believe something you know not to be true, like that blue is the color yellow within the RGB spectrum. You'll find that these beliefs require you to start layering on either a shit ton of assumptions, or you just cannot do it. You can't manage it. because we can't change those beliefs. So if we accept that, and we accept that Christianity is defined by a religion where people believe that Christ was God, eventually you would run out of people whose minds could be changed on the topic of Christianity. And you would instead find that there's a different step required to eliminating Christianity. Now, while some people may be reasonable and say, yeah, we would never try to do that, Michael Knowles, on the other hand, has not said that we would not try to harm trans people. He's actually been very public about calling trans people no different than pedophiles and saying that we need to eliminate transgenderism. It doesn't take a very big stretch of the imagination to understand what's being said there. Again, every puzzle piece is available to you. But instead, Matt decides to engage in the pedantic response. It's interesting to me as well because there are plenty of other people who Matt gets angry with for being equally as pedantic while he does so himself. That's not supposed to be me attacking his character there, though. That's me giving what I believe is valid criticism of not taking the time to look in the mirror and recognizing that a trait that you do not like in other people is a trait that you currently have as well. Bear in mind, I still have lots of respect for Matt Dillahunty. This one instance has not caused me to lose all of my respect I have for the guy. I also think that it's perfectly valid to openly criticize something that I believe to be less than useful. And this kind of pedantry, I do believe, is less than useful. Going further into the conversation, Sarah rightfully brings up Michael Knowles as an example in favor of her argument. I'll read out what she says specifically because it will probably contextualize Matt's response, but she says, man, whatever, you just want to wear blinders and the real goals of the GIP, or to the real goals of the GOP and the right, which is fucking sad considering you claim to be an ally of the marginalized. Now, this is kind of insulting, but it is also a salient criticism. When presented with evidence, not primary sourced evidence, mind you, but evidence nonetheless of the words and the machinations of Trump and the GOP, Matt did decide to engage in pedantry. There is a side to this we'll get to here in a bit, but she brings up Michael Knowles here. She brings up Michael Knowles, where everybody else had to play defense for him so that his whole we can eliminate transgender people thing didn't sound like the call to genocide that it actually is. Where Matt responds saying, keep trash talking me while spreading bad arguments and hyperbole, it's really helping. I talk about the real goals all the time, honestly and responsibly, sorry that you don't. I feel like if we read Project 2025, again, as I've done in a 3-part series so far, where a 4th part will come as soon as I have the spoons to tackle it, we know what their stated goals are, eliminating transgender people out of the United States entirely. We don't have to stretch our imagination too far. It is a 900-page book, which sucks all hell out of your soul to read, but it is there and available to you. Sarah then says, how is this trash talk? You go harder on people regularly. Now, this is whataboutism, which I engaged in earlier, but let's take a look here. Said, how is this trash talk? You go harder on people regularly. You're not even addressing any points made or addressing what the stated goals of the Project 2025 are. You're just telling me to shut up and leave you alone. Matt responds with a quote from Sarah, you just want to wear blinders, and saying, no, you just can't argue for shit. Now we are past the point of any reasonable debate. Now we are past the point of anybody presenting evidence to the other. Now we are at the point where people are just fighting each other. This keeps on going down until there's another conversation happening with Leftist Owl, where Leftist Owl interjects after Sarah says, how do you think it starts? The Holocaust didn't start with putting people on trains. And Matt Dillahunty responds saying that you seem to be incapable of arguing honestly and are literally presenting a fallacious slippery slope to defend your hyperbole. This is where I disagree with Matt. I actually agree with Sarah entirely here. It's perfectly reasonable to take a look at the end result of trying to ban HRT in the United States. It's also perfectly reasonable to believe that the United States would engage in using internment camps again because we already did it to the Japanese. There is precedent within our legal system for doing so. There is precedent within our history for doing so. The slippery slope fallacy is a fallacy where somebody engages in rhetoric saying if A happens, then Z must necessarily happen. This is not a slippery slope fallacy. The slippery slope fallacy only happens when you say a necessary end result is the genocide here. All Sarah is arguing here is that it is a likely and possible end result, and it is quantifiable by looking at the rhetoric of the pundits involved, Matt Walsh and Michael Knowles being some of the most vocal ones in this particular conversation. And we know politicians are listening to those pundits, and we know that they're connected with the Heritage Foundation. We know that a lot of this money ends up spewing around from the Koch brothers, leading to where we are now. I don't want to go too much further into that particular tangent because the tinfoil hat has to be strapped a little tighter than normal to start doing the whole let's follow the money everywhere it may go and then start making assumptions from there. I'd like to stick only with the words that have been said and the stated goals. Heritage Foundation has said that they want to eliminate every inkling of what it means to be transgender in the United States, and Michael Knowles has echoed such remarks. It is therefore very reasonable to assume that at some point you would run out of trans people that you can stop from transitioning, and you would be left only with the people who have transitioned or will be transitioning regardless of what you do. Once you're left with those people, much like once you're left with only the Christians who can't be convinced, what do you do after that point? I think it's perfectly reasonable to assume what the next step possibly could be. That's not an inculcation of the slippery slope fallacy. That's simply pointing out, hey, A and B have been accomplished, and C is the next thing that would happen. So what do we do? Where are we at? If you don't believe this, then you believe that there is no ability to determine cause and effect ever. We are allowed to make assumptions about the next steps in any causal chain. It doesn't mean that it is a fallacy to make those assumptions, and it is perfectly reasonable in this case to make the assumptions that have been made. Again, slippery slope only happens when you say necessarily and only is this the end result. In the case of trans people, though, I'm willing to bet it is the end result. I am 100% willing to bet that a country with a history of putting undesirables in internment camps in areas of war, that exists in a state of perpetual war with other countries, and has declared war on such esoteric principles as drugs and transgenderism, and, well, not transgenderism yet, but terrorism. I think, again, all of the puzzle pieces are there to put, well, you don't have to put blinders on to look at that direction. You've got everything you need to understand that there's a high chance of this happening. And there's a high chance of people with power and influence wanting it to happen. Matt Dillahunty's response to the "how do you think this starts" is to say you're incapable of arguing honestly and are literally presenting a fallacious slippery slope to defend hyperbole. It's embarrassingly bad, and I've got another show to do, so I'll just end this here. Goodbye. Leftist Al responds saying, Matt, do you agree that trans healthcare saves their lives and lessens suicidality? Which, of course, Matt does respond yes with. I haven't lost all respect for the guy. He is doing his best to be a trans ally. I can see that. I just don't think he's doing a very good job right here. Leftist Al responds, saying, then would taking away that healthcare necessarily mean more trans people would die? This is a very logical A-B progression. This is what you would do when building any syllogism on this topic. So Matt says, yes, I agree that taking away trans healthcare means more trans people would die. But does that mean the stated goal and desire is death? No. Stop confusing effects with motivations. So let's talk about Ben Shapiro for a quick moment. This is a man who spent a lot of time studying debate. He understands what logical fallacies are. He understands how to argue with people. He understands intrinsically how to be correct in an argument. So why is he often as wrong as he is? Because he also understands that rhetoric is oftentimes far more powerful. Undermining your opponent is often far more powerful than being factually correct. You can appeal to people's common sense and get a similar result to just being correct. People will agree with you, especially if the research required to figure out that you're wrong is very, very dense and in many cases hard to do and has things that are contradictory with it, like the Cass report. That is the case when it comes to transgender medicine. So, I would assume that people like Ben Shapiro are not incompetent. I would assume that people like Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh are not incompetent. I would assume that the $1 million think tank behind the Heritage Foundation is not incompetent. If incompetency has been ruled out, then that leaves only maliciousness. Because if their stated goals are to make sure that trans people do not have access to healthcare, and they are not incompetent, then they know that this will necessarily lead to trans people dying. I am not willing to assume incompetence here. This only leaves maliciousness as a factor. Because if they are competent, then they understand the mechanics involved here. And the mechanics involved here necessarily do not favor trans people. So taking the decisions that do not favor trans people and are built to remove their rights, there's only two options. Either they are ignorant or they are malicious. Because if they are not ignorant and they know that it will do harm, then anything they do will just be a malicious act. They being the political pundits, the political think tanks, and in many cases like Trump, the politicians involved in the lawmaking and the bargaining for lawmaking process. Whether or not cruelty is or is not the point, I'm not really concerned with. I'm more concerned with the broad terminology. And I'm not willing to accept that the multi-million-dollar think tank is incompetent here. I am willing to accept that they have done all the research required. This is why people like Ben Shapiro, who probably have done plenty of research on trans issues, have done plenty of research on this stuff, have done so much like Georgia Paytas, who, if you do not know, is one of the people who works under Ken Ham, and got a biology degree specifically so that she could ignore all the study that she did and say that she has the piece of paper that says that she is an expert so that she can undermine it in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. This is not somebody who's ignorant. This is somebody who did all of the work. This is somebody who is malicious. They have decided to do all of the work in order to gain the expertise they need to claim from the pulpit that they are an expert and can be anti-evolution with all of that information. I believe Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, and Michael Knowles are similar, or at least Shapiro is similar in this regard. The people in the Heritage Foundation are similar in this regard. I assume they've done the research. I assume competency from them. And I hate to belabor the point, but once we assume competency from them, which I'm very comfortable doing, we are only left anymore with maliciousness. Dan Briggs says, may I DM you on Discord? Something is up with your Discord. Are you talking about my Discord channel? If it's the no politics thing, I'm keeping that one. I'm sorry. I want my Discord to be a chill space. I do not want it to be a space where people are constantly bitching at one another and being wrong. Yeah, I'm sorry. It may be the Discord of a political channel, but I don't want to deal with policing a billion fucking people. And I don't want my mod team to have to do it either. If there's something else, then by all means, DM me. That's entirely fine. My DMs are open. At this point, Actual Jake responds saying, you don't think there's a conscious harm being done with these proposed changes, considering LGBTQ people being called pedophiles is very extreme shit. I'm surprised by your take here. You go way harder on people regularly than anyone in this thread went on you. Heat/kitchen exchange. Now, this is snark. Could this have been argued better? Yes. Do I also believe that escalation had already gotten to a point when Jake came in and was literally trying to defend his partner? That's up for y'all to decide. I am not here to necessarily take sides in the conversation. I'm here to showcase something that I deem as entirely non-useful. Matt says, I went too hard. I said I wasn't swayed by hyperbole to someone who claimed it wasn't hyperbole, couldn't defend that, questioned my integrity, made fallacious arguments, tripled down, then went to Holocaust and accusations that I wouldn't say what I said to you. Bullshit. To which Jake says, which is the hyperbolic part that goes too far for you? Camps? What is the imposed imprisonment of LGBTQ people? Labeling them as pedophiles is barely different than criminalization. I'm confused why being shown aspects of Project 2025 angers you, or why this interaction does. And no, I mean in general, you have a short fuse and hang up on people or yell at them to shut the fuck up all the time. So I don't know why rather lightly approaching you with excerpts from a GOP policy makes you so angry. I haven't actually seen you describe why you consider it hyperbolic. Dillahunty responds, says, then you didn't pay attention. She came on my thread whining about white men, irrelevant, and asserting that they want trans people dead or in camps. That's hyperbole. Nothing she posted supports that without fallacies and or hyperbole. Maybe tone police my wife instead. Okay, so for context, Matt Dillahunty's wife, Arden, is actually trans, so I can pull the same defense here, Matt, with my partner being Saki. We've been together over a year, and she is trans. Razor says, who is this fool? It's Matt Dillahunty, and he's, for all intents and purposes, a pretty decent guy. This one exchange is just very, very strange to me. I want to show the issue that I have where this part is concerned. She came on my thread whining about white men, irrelevant. No, it's not irrelevant. It's a common call in lefty spaces to check your privilege. So, oftentimes, people like me do not see, like we literally just do not see certain injustices happening. Because injustices are way easier to see when they happen to you or people around you. Now, it's very easy for me, and by extension, I would assume Matt, to see all the injustices that are happening towards trans people because my partner is trans. I make an active effort to understand what is going on legally in regards to transgender people. This is one of the reasons why Erin Reed's Twitter is so fucking useful. She goes into great detail about every single piece of legislation that is being used to demonize trans people or make it harder for them to live. I hope you can see where I'm going here. The information available to understand what people behind Project 2025 want done to trans people has been pretty transparent for a while. The rate of legislation against trans people, involving trans people at all, has exponentially increased in the last 3 years compared to multiple years prior. It's insane. Again, we can put the tinfoil hat on for a moment and talk about Christopher Rufo and his involvement in every single right-wing panic in the last 5 years, whether it be about CRT or trans people or anything. We can do that, but that's not the purpose of this video, so I'll leave that there to say I've done videos on that particular topic. If you feel like looking into those, you can. Where Matt's concerned here, though, it should not be problematic to tell somebody who is less likely to see injustices out in the world in regards to a minority group to check their privilege. Again, this is a very common thing that lefties will do with one another. The entire point of intersectionality, which as far as I'm aware, Matt actually is fairly behind. He can quote me wrong on that in maybe an inevitable video, lambasting me for doing this video instead of directly talking to him about this. But regardless, when it comes to privilege, when it comes to intersectionality, you have to ask yourself how many axes of... For a lot of intersectionality, it's based on oppression. So we'll say, how many axes of oppression do you have to deal with? And for me, I'm a cis guy. I'm a white guy. I'm fairly straight. I mean, I did as straight as sucking your girlfriend's dick makes you. Straight enough. So a lot of injustices that happen to minority groups don't happen to me. I don't have to worry too hard about a police officer grabbing me in the middle of the night when I'm driving down the road. I don't really need to worry too much about my rights being infringed on when a politician goes and takes the punditry. I can, if I so choose, basically ignore politics in their entirety if I wanted to use my privilege for my own benefit and only my own benefit. That's a thing I could do. I choose not to do that because there's too many people that I care about and love that are directly affected by politics, so I do what I can to try to check that privilege. I'm not trying to do any stupid fucking white guilt shit or anything like that. It's literally just me going, oh, yeah, no, there are certain things I just don't have to consider because I'm a white guy. I don't have to consider my voting rights being taken away because there's no legal precedent on that happening. I don't have to consider rights to my medications being taken away because I'm fairly healthy, at least outside of my weight, so there's not really any medications that I'm at threat of losing. I don't have to worry about my ability to go out in public leading to any particular threat to me because there's not really a contingent of people that call people like me pedophiles on the internet routinely, except for the people who like Nick Fuentes, but their guy's the guy who's going on about lowering the age of consent, so I don't know what to do with that information specifically, but that's all that's happening there. And if Matt doesn't want to recognize that, that is entirely on him. Jake responds saying, Tone Police, man, that's not what's happening here. So you think they want them imprisoned and pushed out of public life, no teachers, librarians, government employees, but this wouldn't lead to further violence. I don't know, it seems pretty obvious how they treat minorities here. To which we ignore the actual points there and focus on the tone policing thing, and then Matt accuses Jake of poisoning the well, and they go further on until Matt ends up dropping the conversation entirely. If you need to look at all the details of the conversation, you can do so. Leftist Al says, if somebody says, I want Matt Dillahunty dead, and then goes and buys a rope, hammer, and plastic wrap, then they show up to your house and are sitting outside in their car, is it not safe to assume that person has intent to kill you? Matt says, where did they say they want someone dead? We went through that with the last person. They failed. Maybe you can make the case. Again, Matt, the case is not, and really has never been, that they've outright stated it. The point that Leftist Al was trying to make, which I don't agree with how they made it because it's far more blatant than euphemism, the point is about euphemism. The point is about looking at right-wing language, looking at right-wing dog whistles, and recognizing them for what they are. Matt, for you to make this take, you have to assume that every single person that just randomly says 1488 in the wind isn't using it as a dog whistle for Heil Hitler. But we know that when people put 1488 out there into the wind, it is a dog whistle for that. You have to assume that the history of bracketing the names of Jewish people on the internet wasn't done specifically because they were Jewish, because they didn't say they did it because they were Jewish. Except they did on some far-off internet forum where nobody got to see what they were saying until somebody uncovered it later on down the road. As opposed to taking plenty of public information and inferring what is very easy to understand there, you've decided instead to be pedantic. There's another person who is equally pedantic and ridiculously annoying for that point, and that's Steve McRae. I've talked about him very, very briefly with Vice Rhino before, and we used to be friends, but I'm going to be honest, watching Steve McRae be as pedantic as he has been on trans issues has made me not want to associate with him. I don't speak to him anymore. I don't consider this person a friend anymore. I let that friendship basically die in the wind several years ago because I saw that writing on the wall. And I didn't have the spoons and I don't have the spoons now to try to repair that bridge, nor do I find it to be a useful bridge for me to try to repair in the first place. What you're doing here, Matt, is the same thing. It's a lot of the same thing. And I'm not saying this to sound like an asshole or a dick-sucking fan or anything like that. I'm saying this as somebody who's broke bread with you, who's watched your stuff, who's spent time playing video games with you, mostly Among Us, but still. I say this as somebody who is on the internet and cares about trans people's rights. What you're doing here is not useful. It's incredibly not useful. It is burning bridges left and right for the sole purpose of what? Winning points for being technically correct on something? It seems largely useless to me. And then when Leftist Owl brings up the correct thing to bring up, Michael Knowles' words on transgenderism, and then Matt Dillahunty responds with, "Ism, look it up." I have to assume there's deliberate idiocy going on here. I have to. And I don't want to assume that because, again, this is a content creator who I have had a fuck ton of respect for multiple years. And would like to continue having respect for multiple years to come. But Matt, seriously, you know better. Eliminating transgenderism or eliminating gayness would necessarily require the elimination of transgender people. You are saying this with your full chest on Twitter, and I know why you're saying it, because you made the follow-ups with Katie Montgomery afterwards on why. When Sarah said, "What do you think they meant when they said eradicate transgenderism and register all trans people as pedophiles?" And Matt responds, "Neither of those is stating they want them dead or in camps." Matt, what do the right wing claim they want to do to all pedophiles? Just take a wild guess. They say they want to kill them. Many right-wing organizations actively sell kill your local pedophile t-shirts. So if they equate trans people to pedophiles and they say they want to kill all pedophiles, then what do they want to do to the trans people, Matt? Katie responds saying, "What happens to the trans people who refuse to stop taking trans medication or using the toilet? I think it's pretty fair to conclude that they would put us in prisons." Which Matt does respond, yes, but that doesn't mean their goal or desire is death or imprisonment. I've agreed what the actual effects are, and those should be addressed and opposed. That was the point. This entire fight, this entire conversation, this entire back and forth has been over a pedantic usage of a very accurate term. For what fucking point? For what fucking purpose? What was all the burned bridges for? If you agree that all the actions they want to take necessarily lead to the death of trans people, and we can agree that that should be opposed, and we can agree that they want to do that, it is very fucking fair to assume that the people who want to harm trans people want to harm trans people. It's super easy to come to that conclusion. And I'm not saying that because of intellectual laziness, the easy conclusions are the right ones. No! I'm saying that because if we all agree that that is the reasonable conclusion, and if it is a 99% certainty, which I think we all can agree is, then instead of pussyfooting around saying that, well, we can't prove they want to kill all trans people, but these actions would necessarily lead to it. No, I think we are I think we can very reasonably use stronger language. I think we can very reasonably use accurate language about people doing things at point A necessarily understanding what happens at point B. I think we can do that. I think it's reasonable for us to do that, Matt. All of us. You're cis. I'm cis. I'm saying you can agree to that. I'm in your situation. A lefty on the internet talking about these issues where it comes to religious fundamentalism and people being fucking crazy rightoids on the internet with a partner who is trans. We are in the same boat, Matt. We are here. This exchange, Matt says, when you assert their motivations and you're wrong or can't prove it, they get to dismiss you and your argument justifiably. Gay conversion therapy is harmful. This doesn't mean those advocating for it want harm. It means the harm isn't enough to make them stop. If they acknowledge that the harm is there and they want to do it, then they want harm. That's how that works. They think that the harm is a trade-off for something that they'd prefer, but they still want the harm. It has to be internally acknowledged there. Katie Montgomery says, then I see what you're saying. I think a lot of them do actively want to cause harm or put us in camps. But some of them just think that our suffering is meaningless, and some of them really think they're helping. Matt says, I agree, and if someone could demonstrate the motives we suspect, that would be great, but until then, it is unnecessary and unwise to assert motivations. And of course, the comments afterwards are accurate. What was the point of splitting that hair? H2 saying, you've made good points. I just think the existence of brown shirts doing salutes and anti-trans rallies and not being immediately beaten up by the organizers is a huge sign that they're happy for things to end up that way. This whole thread, this whole fight, the burnt bridges, the fighting, all of it was done. I don't want to assume motivations. Sorry for the burp. I don't want to assume motivations on the part of Matt. Because again, Matt being in the exact same scenario, content creator-wise and relationship-wise, that I'm in, I know he knows better. I know he knows better. However, that particular hair being split is such a fucking useless thing to do. It does nothing but allow us to divide ourselves further when we should be uniting better to fight this shit. We should be uniting better to get organized with things like, well, I'll just go ahead and say it. We should be getting politically organized to stop this. Whether it is by forcing people to vote, and by forcing, I mean grabbing your friends and going for a very fun time, and you know they're all registered to vote with you, and you go, hey guys, I'm gonna go stop in real quick to vote. It is voting day after all. Any of you want to come with me? I feel like it's a perfectly reasonable thing to do as of right now. Get people up off their ass and get involved. And if not just voting, there's plenty of shit they can do on top of that. Here, let me go ahead and list off some of the ones you can do in Georgia right now. I click a button here. These are all from the Human Rights Campaign, but in Douglasville, there is a Coordinated Democrats Weekend of Action community thing that is happening. You can check that out tomorrow. I mean, that'll be today when this comes out, or maybe it'll be yesterday by the time it comes out. But I'm saying this on stream too, so maybe that's for y'all. There is a phone bank training event happening as well during that. There is an entire thing happening on Friday for on-the-ground stuff that you can do to get better trained, to get involved politically. Those are events that are happening in the state. There is a thing where you can take action with the People's Power United in Georgia that is happening Thursday, October 31st. If you have already voted and you just want to make sure it's easier for other people to vote, especially when people like Brian Kemp have made it harder to vote for several people in Georgia, you can be involved in Rideshare to Vote in Georgia, where you basically take on the role of a cab driver getting people to and from the polls. Let's see here. What other stuff is there? Hell, there's even paid shit you can do. There's paid door knocking that you can do, that the Progressive Turnout Project is trying to get people involved with. There's a John Lewis Day of Commemoration and Action you can get involved with. There is the training for the rideshare stuff as well, and there's plenty more. I'm literally just reading them off of the fucking website. There's plenty of stuff we can be doing to get involved, and fighting each other isn't fucking doing it. Fighting each other is pointless. The only reason I'm engaging here in the way that I am is because I think that this is an important thing to elucidate to everyone. For all the respect I have for Matt, I cannot say that this is something that I think anybody should be engaged with. I think we all can agree that when it comes to Project 2025, Donald Trump and the punditry that is supporting him, we know what their end goals are. Our focus should be on fighting those end goals, not infighting with ourselves for some fucking reason. Ideally, we are all on a similar or the same side. We all want trans people to be able to live their lives happy and healthily. We all want to make sure that religious trauma isn't done to multiple people growing up, by it being forced in schools, by it being forced in general, by the status quo being one that all kids grow up Christian. We all want that to change because we recognize the dangers inherent in that stuff. But instead of focusing on that, let's be pedantic over what the motivations of actual fucking cartoon villains are. The left has a problem with eating its own damn tail. It does. We are an Ouroboros of purity testing, and we will literally destroy each other before getting anything done because it makes us feel better on Twitter.com. Anyways, that's it for that. I've used up the last of my spoons. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. This is probably going to have some major fallout for me. Who knows? But I stand by everything I fucking said. Insert in the video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Britzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.